Hi guys, so I'm going to discuss about the definite integral. So instead of having an equation for your final answer, we will now have a definite answer, which means you have your limits. The limits is classified as two. It can be the lower limit, which is a, and the upper limit, which is b. For example, you have an equation of f of x with respect to x, which is the dx. You have to integrate the equation, then that answer will be your f of x. Then the limits is from a to b. So you have the lower limits up to your lower limits. So you have to evaluate the answer, yung dumaan na ka-integral, wherein you have the lower limit, which is the value of a, and the upper limit, which is the value of b. So how to integrate this equation? So substitute mo lang si b as the value of x, yun yung una, minus, then isa-substitute mo naman si a, which is your lower limit, as your x. So yun yung f of a. So you have to evaluate the f of b minus the f of a, or simply saying na evaluated si f of x na nakasubstitute si upper limit minus the evaluation of f of a, wherein that is your lower limit. So para mas madaling intindihin, we will try to solve different equation na merong limits. So for example number 1 is the integral of the quantity of 2x minus 3 dx, wherein your limits is from 1 to 2. So 1 is your lower limit and 2 is your upper limit. So first, you have to integrate 2x minus 3. So you will have the integral of 2x dx minus the integral of 3 dx. So in that case, integrating this form, you will have the constant 2. Then the integral of x is x squared over 2. Minus, the integral of 3 dx is 3x. Then simplifying this equation first, that will be x squared minus 3x. Now you have to put your limits, which is from 1 to 2. So you have to substitute 2 kay equation, then 1 kay equation. First is the f of b, wherein is a substitute mo c upper limit, which is your 2. So that is 2 squared minus 3 times 2. Now this is your f of b. Minus, substituting 1 kay equation, so that will be 1 squared minus 3 multiplied by 1. So ito ngayon c f of a. Now simplifying this will be 2 squared, that is 4. Then 3 times 2 is 6, then negative 6. Then this will be 1 squared, which is 1 multiplied by negative, so that is negative 1. Then 3 times 1 is 3, then negative 3 multiplied by another negative, so that is plus 3. So you will have 4 minus 6 minus 1 plus 3. So 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Then minus 1, that's negative 3, plus 3. So the answer will be 0. So the f of x is x squared minus 3x, since that is in terms of x. Then for the final answer, the value is 0. Naintindihan niyo po? Now going back to example number 2. We will now have the integral of the quantity x minus 1 raised to 3 dx, wherein your limits is negative 1 to 0. So evaluating this first, the integral of the quantity x minus 1 raised to 3 dx. So if you let your u as x minus 1, your du is simply dx. So this will be u raised to 3 du. So that's u raised to 4 over 4. So that is 1/4 of x minus 1 raised to 4, wherein your limits is from -1 to 0. So substituting your limits, so upper limit first, so that is 1/4, then 0 minus 1 raised to 4 minus 1/4 of -1 minus 1 raised to 4. So evaluating these values, so this is -1 raised to 4, so you will have +1. So that is multiplied to 1/4. So you will now have 1/4. Tapos, this one, -1 minus 1, that's -2. Raised to 4, that's 2 times 2 times 2, and another 2. So that's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Then you will have times a -1/4, so -1/4 of 16. So 16 divided 4 is 4. So you will now have 1/4 minus 4. So simplifying this, you will now have over 4. Then 1 minus 16, you will have -15 over 4. So for your f of x, that is 1/4. Then x minus 1 raised to 4. But your final answer is -15 over 4. Next example is about the integral of dx over x minus 2 squared. So, itataas natin si x minus 2 squared. You will now have the integral of x minus 2 raised to -2 dx, wherein the limits is from -1 to 1. So if you let your u as x minus 2, your du would be your dx. So that is u raised to -2 du. So ang lalabas is u raised to -1 over -1. So you will have your u as x minus 2 raised to -1 over -1. The limits is from -1 to 1. So simplifying this first equation, you will have -1 over x minus 2, wherein the limits is from -1 to 1. So evaluating your limits, so that is -1 over 1 minus 2 minus of the -1 over -1 minus 2. So first fraction, that's -1 over 1 minus 2, that's also -1. -1 over -1 is +1. Then minus -1 over -3, that's +1/3. Then simplifying this, your denominator is 3. Then you will have 3 minus 1. So that is 2/3. So for your f of x, that is -1 over x minus 2. But for your final answer, the definite integral is 2/3. Okay, next example, example number 4. You have the integral of sine of 2x dx, wherein your limits is from 0 to pi over 4. So we will do trigonometric. Okay, so if you let u as 2x, our du now is 2 dx. So I need to insert 2, then balance by 1/2. Then you will have sine u du, wherein the integral of sine u du is negative of cosine u. So you will have -1/2 of the cosine of 2x, wherein the limits is from 0 to pi over 4. Now evaluating the limits, you have to substitute. So you will have -1/2, then cosine of 2 pi over 4 minus of the negative 1/2, then cosine of 2 multiplied to 0. So cosine 0 is 1. Then 2 pi over 4 is simply pi over 2. Then pi over 2 is 90 degrees. Then cosine 90 degrees is 0. So you will now have 0 minus of the negative 1/2. So that will be positive 1/2. So for your f of x, you will have negative 1/2 of the cosine of 2x. But for the definite value of the integral, that is positive 1/2. Then example number 5 is the integral of the quantity 1 over x squared minus x dx. So evaluating this integral, so that will be the integral of 1 over x squared dx minus the integral of x dx. So 1 over x squared can be simplified as x raised to negative 2 dx minus the integral of x dx. So integrating this equation, you will now have x raised to negative 1 over negative 1 minus x squared over 2. Then simplifying this will be negative 1 over x minus 1/2 of x squared, wherein the limits is from 1 to 2. So you will now have to substitute your upper limit minus the lower limit. So that will be negative 1 over 2 minus 1/2 of the 2 squared minus the negative 1 over 1 minus 1/2 of 1 squared. So you will have to simplify the equation or the numbers. You will have negative 1/2. Then 2 times 2 is 4. So that's minus 4 over 2. Minus, that's negative 1 minus 1/2. So you will have negative 1 minus 4. That is negative 5 over 2. Then minus, simplifying this part, that is over 2. So that will be 2 times negative 1, that's negative 2, minus 1, so that's negative 3/2. So simplifying these numbers, you will now have negative 5 minus negative 3, or simply negative 5 plus 3, that's negative 2 over 2. So that is negative 1. So for our f of x, you will have negative 1 over x minus 1/2 of x squared. But for the definite value of the integral, you will have negative 1. Then for our last example, we will have example number 6, which is the integral of x dx all over the quantity of 1 plus x squared raised to 2. So first, kailangan nating itaas si denominator. So we will have the integral of 1 plus x squared raised to negative 2 multiplied by x dx. Now if we let u as 1 plus x squared, you will now have the du as 2x dx. So we have x dx at the original equation. We'll just need to insert 2, then balance by 1/2. You will now have 1/2, then the integral of u raised to negative 2 du. And the equivalent of that is u raised to negative 1 over negative 1. So you will have positive 1/2 multiplied to 1 plus x squared raised to negative 1 over negative 1, wherein the limits is from 0 to 1. So you will have negative 1 over 2 multiplied by 1 plus x squared. The limits is from 0 to 1. Now evaluating your limits, you will now have the upper limit minus the lower limit, so that's negative 1 over 2 multiplied to 1 plus 1 squared minus negative 1 over 2 multiplied by 1 plus 0 squared. So you will have 1 squared plus 1, that is 2 multiplied by 2, that's 4. So you will have negative 1/4 minus 1 plus 0 is 1 multiplied by 2, that's 2. So that's negative 1/2. So simplifying this, your denominator will be 4. So we will have negative 1 minus, so that's 4 divide 2, that is 2 multiplied by negative 1, that's negative 2. So negative 1 minus negative 2, so you will have negative 1 plus 2 over 4. So the answer will be positive 1/4. So for our f of x, that is negative 1 over 2, then 1 plus x squared. Then for the definite value of the integral, that is 1 over 4. And that's it. That is for the topic definite integral. So kailangan